You know, I was actually feeling kind of grumpy because I got up a little late this morning. I've got construction work going on at my house, and I had thought I might be able to get to the gym and do a workout, and I wasn't able to do it. But it's okay because I had my aerobic workout coming up from parking structure 7 to get to Covell Commons, especially with a couple of misdirections. So thank you. Thanks to everybody for being here and for your interest in this topic. So first of all, I love the ports. I love the ports for a lot of reasons, one of which is that I have a fascination, which I will freely confess to, with big equipment, large equipment that moves lots of things around, and you'll never find a bigger collection of that stuff than you would at the port of LA Long Beach. I like the water, of course, like who does not? I am particularly interested in fashion, I have to admit, and I like the fact that I get a lot of stuff that is imported through the ports. But I also have found it fascinating over the years to try to delve into these topics because it has been so little understood and so little really addressed in terms of the incredible impact that the ports have on the urban area and on our economy in the state of California and on all of our health and well-being. The Air Resources Board has been focused on the ports as the largest single source of air pollution within the state of California for quite a few years now, and adopted a plan back in early 2000s to try to address all the different sources at the ports, primarily because of our concerns with diesel particulate as a carcinogen and the disproportionate impact that this area had on the lungs of people who live in the immediate area of the port. But since that time, our interests and our knowledge have evolved pretty rapidly. I do want to say, by the way, there are other ports in the state of California that are important to their communities and to the people who rely on them. There's Oakland, there's San Diego, and even Port Hueneme, all of which have ports, and those ports are important to them. But when I talk about ports, I'm really talking about LA Long Beach because that's the big one. And big as we are, and we are significant within the United States, with about a fourth, I believe, of all the stuff that comes into and goes out of our country passing through those two ports. We're not even on the top 10 when it comes to ports in the world. And that, given the disproportionate weight that California swings in other areas, it's somewhat, I think, important to recognize that big as those ports are, they're not the biggest fish when it comes to making decisions on a global level about the fate of shipping or the types of engines and fuels. They're important, but they're not as decisive as we have been in other areas. But from the perspective of the state of California, it's actually sort of shocking to realize how little has been known or focused on when it comes to the impact and the well-being of the ports when you think about what role they play in revenue generation and jobs for the state of California. And I remember this really came to my attention vividly, even though I'd been interested in the ports for a long time as a resident of Los Angeles, an environmental lawyer. When I was working in the Gray Davis administration at the Resources Agency, and there was a big strike at the ports, which went on for a number of days. There were more than a week before the federal government stepped in with mediation. And there were ships sitting off our shore, running engines and so forth, things not getting delivered, shipments getting backed up, huge impact on the economy. And there was no agency in California that had any legal responsibility for doing anything about it. And to the extent that they knew anything about it, which I would say, the state transportation agency certainly was aware of the situation, but they did not feel like they had or could have any direct role in dealing with the situation. So perhaps somewhat by default, the environmental agencies have come to the fore as the major interface with the shipping industry and with the ports themselves when it comes to planning for their future. I'm not sure that that's the right way to do it, but we've been willing to recognize that we have a responsibility not only for reducing the impact of the operation as a whole, but also for assuring its continued well-being. And that may be a little bit more controversial for some folks, but given the disproportionate impact that the being around the port has if you happen to be a neighbor. But again, I think if you look at the role that California plays in the globe, this function of ours looms very, very important, and it behooves us all to think about how to plan for its future, not just from the perspective of, how do we keep doing what we're doing without having killed the goose that laid the golden egg, so to speak, but also really how do we play a role in the logistics of the future when we look at life through a climate lens. That is, how do we think about the things that we are buying or moving around and what we can do in a life cycle context to reduce the overall CO2 and greenhouse gas impact of those things. I am convinced that at some point we're going to be able to actually assign a number, a life cycle GHG number, to things that we interact with on a daily basis, whether it's cars or socks or whatever, and that we will be able to compare products based on the full impact of how they were produced, how they were shipped, and how they are used. We're a far cry from that right now, but I think increasingly, as we see how complicated it is to address the causes and the sources of the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the desperate need that we face to do something about it quickly, we're going to be driven to inventing that kind of a metric. And there's probably no better place than a university to actually contribute to bringing together the various disciplines and ideas and experts that it would take to get to that point. But I live, of course, at this point in the world of policy and policy implementation. And I think it's fair to say that since we first began working seriously on these issues, we have made pretty significant progress. Most of the progress has come about as a result of the fact that people have recognized that this was a problem that could be addressed through technology. And I'm particularly speaking now of the air quality impacts of the ports on the surrounding communities. The fact is that zero emission, which used to be sort of a far-off aspirational goal, is a reality in a number of areas. And while it's not quite there in terms of economic competitiveness, it's very, very close. And the history of our adoption of other kinds of technologies gives us a lot of confidence that with the right mix of incentives and regulation and investment by the private sector, that we could get there and really do some transformational things. But it takes a combination of many different entities and interests all aligning to get to that point. So as far as CARB is concerned, we've been working, of course, on the regulatory side, but we've also helped to pave the way for and raise the money for hundreds of millions of dollars of investment that is going to be coming to the ports to speed the turnover of both equipment and trucks and other vehicles. We've been working with the LA Clean Tech Incubator, which has put itself forward as a packager of entities that are interested in working in this space and in being applicants for funding, mostly governmental agencies, but also some number of key private sector entities, including the utilities, to see how we can develop applications for the funds that are coming now to us, to make sure that we are directing them in ways that are going to be as cost effective as possible and get us the most bang for the bucks that we have, because we know that it's, well, $200 million is a good start. You know, it's not anywhere near ultimately where we need to go or what it's going to take to actually get there. But I don't see any likelihood of the state turning back from this mission that we have accepted to promote both faster and cleaner freight movement in and out of the LA basin. I do see growing awareness and sophistication about the complexities of this sector, which makes passenger cars look simple by comparison. If you look at the number of different entities and the different interests and the number of types of equipment alone that we're dealing with, not to mention the fact that we are also implicating a huge amount of the real estate of Southern California. I smiled when Sean mentioned Volkswagen, because in addition to being the biggest enforcement case that ARB has had, certainly in my memory, and one that got us a lot of international attention, it also generated a huge demand for space. Why? Because of all those vehicles that are in violation and that can't be fixed, or at least for which there is no fix right now. One of the biggest occupants now of what was formerly vacant space at the port, but also at every dealership and many other places you might not expect to see it, is Volkswagen just storing cars until they can figure out what they're going to be able to do with them. Most of them, unfortunately, are going to end up as scrap, but there will be some that can be fixed and resold. So anyway, we've got a big real estate empire there. We've got all these governmental entities. We've got all these different pieces of equipment. We've got labor with real issues about what their role is going to be in the future. And this is pretty exciting stuff. So I'm glad that UCLA has decided to jump into this space and work on it, and Berkeley. Ethan helped us convene a group, 6 months, almost a year ago, I guess, a year ago, of people from Amazon to the warehouse owners to the government agencies to just really identify what the issues are. And I think we've got that now done in hand and agreed to. So the next step is to get on with figuring out what the solutions are. So I think that's enough for me for a kickoff for this event. And I do have a few minutes, I believe, that I'm allowed. If anybody has any question that they think I'm the right person to ask, I'd be happy to try to answer it. Hi.
So, Mary, where are we with the feds on cafe and GHGs?
Excuse me? Where are we with the feds on cafe and GHGs? I don't think I have much to tell you beyond what you've read in the newspapers, which is that it appears that the Trump administration really, from the very top and from the very beginning, has had an idea that they could get rid of California's waiver to enforce our regulations, and they've been trying to advance that goal. They have a regulation now at OMB, so we have not officially seen it, and I have not seen it at all, although I know there are people who have, and we've certainly heard about it in considerable detail. And it contains both a rollback or freeze of the standards that were due to go into effect beginning with the 2022 model year and going out to 2025. And so both the CAFE standards and the greenhouse gas emission standards, both DOT and EPA, working towards the same goal. And it also has as a kind of an overarching principle a very lengthy, detailed brief, really, on why it's illegal as well as wrong for California to be trying to set its own standards that are more progressive than federal standards. So it's a head-on assault, really, on the Clean Air Act and on California. When it comes out, it'll be a proposed rulemaking, so they'll be taking comment on this for some period of time, like 60 days, and then they're going to try to finalize whatever it is. In the meantime, the Office of Management and Budget has invited people who are interested in this topic to come in and talk to them while they're working on the regulation. And we're going to be going in next week, and we've urged all the other states that follow us and everybody else who's interested in the topic who wants to try to get an appointment to go in and chat with them. I think it's only helpful to try to educate them about why what we're doing not only is legally appropriate, but also why it makes sense, why it's a good thing for the United States, for business, and the world. We are fortunate that, at least in public, the auto industry is not supportive of the position of asking for a rollback or for trying to overturn California. And I think that although, secretly in their rooms at night, they all would be happy to see it happen, I think that they, as a matter of both policy and pragmatism, have decided that this is not something that they want to engage in, that they'd really like to see a way to resolve it. So there will be other kinds of discussions going on between us and the industry, between now and the end of the year for sure, that could conceivably lead to pull back from the fight. But as of now, it just seems as though we're headed towards litigation on every front that you could think of to try to stop this from happening.
Let me ask you about electricity. Oops, sorry. Hi.
Hi.
I'm getting a charging station at my house, and I know that...
Is there water anywhere?
Is there water,
Water,
for
water.
Mary Nichols?
There's glasses? Thank you. Yeah.
So I know that I'm getting a charging station at my house. I know that I found out the hard way that it's really expensive installing all that infrastructure, the cable, especially for level 2 chargers. And I'm also very interested in the issue of shoreside power at the ports. Mm-hmm. So just since it's a ports conference, let's just talk about the ports. Mm-hmm. What's up with shoreside power? What's the status of it statewide? And the charging infrastructure to have electric vehicles at the ports?
So shoreside power, or something that would get equivalent reductions from the ships while they're at berth, has been on the books for a while, and we've seen a lot of progress in moving in that direction. It's subject to the same kinds of concerns about, about where and how we generate electricity that, we have everywhere else. But it's been actually successfully implemented in a number of places. And, it's just a question of having a ship that is capable of utilizing that type of power. But increasingly, we're seeing those kinds of ships either required to or just choosing to, be the ones that are put into service here. So overall, I think the program, despite a lot of concerns and, fears about whether it was going to impact on the growth of the port, on the utilization of the port, have not proven to be correct. So we have focused on this port, and the other ports that we've dealt with, the main focus has really been on the old trucks that come in and out of the ports that make their way through communities and have a very serious impact in terms of the overall exposures of the communities. And so that has been that has been something that was taken up by the ports themselves here in the LA region. LA, Long Beach both developed a clean action plan that now, almost 10 years old, where they've been gradually, now pretty successfully, I think, keeping older trucks, trucks that weren't up to snuff, from utilizing the port. And it was a hard slog, and there was a lot of opposition. I remember New Year's Eve in 2008, being on the phone pretty much nonstop with my representative, who was at the port in Oakland, where the truckers were threatening to shut down the port over this issue of whether they were going to be required to clean up or trade in their vehicles. And, we had money available, there were loans, there were grants, there was public information, but these things are, slow to change. But in fact, I think we've been pretty successful on both of those fronts. Okay. Oh, here. Hi.
Good morning, Mary. Thank you for great words and guidance this morning. And I hope we're lucky against the Trump administration and with the CAFE standards. It's a real shame, because we need that the ability to lead as California, especially with our pre-existing conditions with air quality. And I think our efforts in climate change are really important. My question for you is, how do you see 2023? Do you think, given the impacts that mobile sources has within, not only on the South Coast, but also the San Joaquin, do you think we have the ability to reach attainment? Do you think that we're going to be able to have enough transition to cleaner vehicles within this very short time frame, or do you think we're going to find ourselves a little bit behind? And if so, what do we do to address mobile source pollution in the near term and then over time?
Well, first of all, I have been working on attempting to attain ambient air quality standards in California, since 1971. So I've been at this for a long time. And what I have seen over that time, through many administrations, many lawsuits, some of which I was on the plaintiff's side and some of which I was on the defendant's side, is that we have continued to make steady progress in cleaning up our air. And I think we need to continue to do that, constantly pushing on technology, as well as pushing on less effectively in the past, but with increasing interest, I would say, at least in terms of the level of attention and the level of engagement that's coming now from agencies that did not consider themselves responsible for air quality. So we've had strong and creative leadership, occasional disputes about stringency and so forth, but overall, when it comes to mobile sources, California and the local air districts have continued to move forward. Even in the San Joaquin Valley, which we tend to be more critical of in terms of some of their attitudes about clean air, the fact is that when it came to putting up money to turn over the fleet, when it came to outreach to low-income people whose cars would flunk smog check, we've seen considerable leadership coming out of the valley. So I want to give them, some fair treatment here as well. But I do think that the issue now, and it's what you're alluding to. I think I know you well enough and where you're coming from. The question is really, are we going to hold back better technologies than we have today while waiting for the perfect? Is the perfect going to be the enemy of the good? Is the zero emission going to prevent us, the goal of zero emission, going to prevent us from taking advantage of the advances and considerable investments that have been put into making diesel a lot cleaner, making natural gas more available, CNG as a transportation fuel? And I don't have the wisdom or the authority to say exactly at what point each of these things is going to come online and how much of them there's going to be. And so what we have tried to do is to steer constantly towards the North Star, which is the zero emission, which is what we want, what the communities want, rightly so. And at the same time, to recognize that where there isn't zero, that we should be not only allowing, but actually putting public money into getting the oldest and dirtiest equipment off the roads and newer, cleaner equipment out there. So that is in fact what's happening right now, is that, there's a large amount of money. I can't give you a total. I should have come prepared for it. But within the funds that are coming out of the greenhouse gas money, the GGRF that comes from our cap and trade program, but also from AB 118 and from Moyer Fund and so forth, there's a substantial amount of money which is available for, and which I assume is going to be used for, cleaner diesel and natural gas, but at the same, and natural gas with an asterisk, because there's a serious effort underway to make sure that that substance is generated more from more renewably and from waste materials rather than more extraction from the ground. So there's actually there's a benefit there in terms of reducing methane emissions and not disposing of things that could otherwise be utilized as fuel. But there's a hierarchy here, just like the old, reduce, reuse, recycle. It's kind of the same thing. I mean, the hierarchy, in our view, needs to be, let's do what we can to speed up the viability of zero, while at the same time not allowing for continued violations. But to specifically answer your question, are we going to meet the standards? I think it's doubtful, but I think we'll do we'll do what we've done every time in the past, which is to find ways to keep making progress, even if we're not all the way there, by looking at the deadlines, by looking at what the penalties and enforcement are going to be, to keep holding everybody's feet to the fire. But I don't see any lack of enthusiasm or commitment for trying to get to that goal right now. Where there are arguments tends to be around the edges of just what's the best method for getting there. One more question. Okay. Maybe back there? Sorry. Hi, with the hat.
What's going on with the railroad freight companies and their diesel? Have they ever been sued? Berkshire Hathaway, they control one of the biggest railroad companies in the United States. What's California's policy with them? And
well, we've had long-term attempts to try to convince the railroads by whatever legal means we had available to us that they needed to turn over their locomotives and get them to the cleanest possible level. We've gotten them up to, I forget what the numbers of the tiers are now. I think it's tier 3, but they should be like at tier 5 if we could get them there. We also want to get more freight onto rail. Even in its current state, it's still more efficient and cleaner overall if you can move things by rail. But we have had some great difficulties in convincing the major railroads that serve the ports to develop projects to get the freight from the ship directly onto the train to take it wherever it needs to go on an inland basis. There's a new effort at the Port of Long Beach. They've made some real progress there, but at LA there was an attempt to build a project which has failed, stalled, and probably won't be revived, certainly not by BNSF anyway, according to them, because they felt like too much was being demanded of them to make the project profitable. And so we're still looking at how we're going to get to on-dock rail and get a viable means there of getting freight containers put directly onto trains. But the preemption issue, which we were just talking about with respect to California's vehicle standards, was very clear as far as the railroads were concerned. They fought for that a century ago, to be only regulated from an emissions perspective at the federal level, and they have fought successfully to prevent effective direct regulation. So we've had to find ways to work indirectly to get to that result, and we've made some progress, but we definitely have a ways to go. Okay, thanks everybody.